Mantras of our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother says our Lord Sri Aurobindo is always with us, enlightening, guiding, protecting. We must answer to His grace by a perfect faithfulness. With my love and blessings, says our Divine Mother. Words of our Divine Mother from the collective works of our Divine Mother, question and answers of 1953, date 25th November 1953, page 369. Question, sweet Mother, you have said it is in proportion to our trust in the Divine that the Divine grace can act for us and help. If someone has no trust in the Divine but calls very sincerely when he is in difficulty, in danger, what will happen to him? For this, our Divine Mother says, how can he call? Two things are contradictory. If he has no trust, he won't even think of the Divine. He won't think of calling. It is contradictory. He thinks of calling exactly in proportion to his trust. For this, the child says, sweet Mother, you have said to smile at an enemy is to disarm him. Smile means what? One ought not to smile at an enemy. For this, our Divine Mother says, oh, ought not to. What I have said here is an experience. It is the record of an experience which I expressed in general terms.
That thy glory may manifest upon the earth. Give us the strength to reject falsehood and emerge in thy truth, pure and worthy of thy victory. Seigneur, nous aspirons à être tes vaillants guerriers, afin que ta gloire soit manifestée sur la terre. Donne-nous la force de rejeter le mensonge et de surgir dans ta vérité, pure et digne de ta victoire.
चक्षुर्नलिप्यते चाक्षुषैर्बाह्यदोषैः एकस्तथा सर्वभूतान्तरात्मा न लिप्यते लोकदुःखेन बाह्या नित्यो अनित्यानां चेतनानाम् एको वहूनां यो विदधाति
Our Divine Mother says, but if at a particular moment somebody comes along with the blackest intentions, if one smiles at him, he is completely disarmed. He can do nothing any longer. But one must smile sincerely. One must not get grin or simper and think one I take smile in a rather complete meaning. That is to say, if one can be sufficiently master of oneself and about things in much a higher consciousness which can see from above, even that which appears the most terrible and most dramatic to the ordinary human consciousness makes you smile as at a childishness. And so, if one is in that consciousness in which one can smile at everything, for one understands the cause of everything and one feels the forces working in all things, if one can be in that consciousness and then smile at what happens, immediately things change. Only this is not a little external and social smile. It must be the psychic being which smiles.
देवी महालक्ष्मीर्नमस्तुते जगत्स्थिते जगन्माता महामेरा नमस्तुते सर्वसिद्धिप्रदायिने महामेरा नमोस्तुते
एते गन्धपुष्पे ओमेकस्मै देवाय ॐ श्रीमीरायै नमः ॐ श्रीमीरायै नमः ॐ श्रीमीरायै नमः
इदमर्घम् ॐ नमः अरविन्दाय नमः ॐ नमः अरविन्दाय नमः ॐ नमः शान्ताय सर्वपापहराय च ॐ नमो श्री अरविन्दाय
Question, sweet mother, doesn't the divine help if he is not called? For this, our divine mother says, it is not altogether like that. The divine consciousness works always, everywhere, and in the same way. The divine grace is active everywhere and in all circumstances in the same way, and so on. But according to your personal attitude, you create within yourself the conditions for receiving what is done or not receiving it. And trust, indeed, trust in the truth. Trust in the truth, trust in the grace, trust in the divine knowledge. This puts you in that state of receptivity in which you can receive these things. Whilst if you have no trust, you may still try to receive something. There are people, for instance, who fling a sort of a challenge. They throw a challenge at the divine and tell him, here is the situation such as it is. I am in these conditions which seem to me at least inextricable. It is impossible to get out of them. But if the divine pulls me out of the difficulty, I shall put my trust in him. There are many people, they do not formulate it like this, but may feel and think in this way. Well, this is the worst of all the possible conditions. Generally, it puts you into a complete hole, and it is exactly the state most opposed to truthfulness. And besides, it's quite a vulgar bargaining. If you do this for me, I shall have faith that you exist. I'm going to try and see if you really exist and whether you are what they say. Do this. And we are going to see clearly if you succeed. Then I shall trust you. Our Divine Mother says, and many people do that without even being aware of it. Any number of men say, how can I have the trust in the Divine? I have such a lamentable and unhappy life. That is to say, they limit the divine consciousness to their personal needs, says our Divine Mother. Question, sweet mother. If one has the trust, does the help come automatically? For this, our Divine Mother says, even an atom of sincerity suffices and it comes. And if truly one calls very sincerely, not just calling and the same time saying, we are going to see now if it is going to succeed, that naturally is not a very good condition. But if one calls very sincerely and sincerely needs the answer, one waits and it always comes. And if one can silence one's mind and be a little quiet, one even perceives the coming of the help and what form it takes. Question, sweet mother, from where do the gods come? For this, our Divine Mother says, you mean what is their origin? Who formed them? But everything comes from the one origin, says our Divine Mother, from the Supreme, the God also. There is a very old tradition which narrates this. I'm going to tell you the story as one does for the children, for in this way you will understand. Our Divine Mother says, one day God decided to exteriorize Himself, objectivize Himself in order to have the joy of knowing Himself in detail. So, first of all, He emanated His consciousness, that is to say, He manifested His consciousness by ordering this consciousness to realize a universe. This consciousness began by emanating four beings, four individualities which are indeed altogether very high beings of the highest reality. They are the being of consciousness, the being of love, of Ananda rather, the being of life, and the being of light and knowledge. But consciousness and light are the same thing. There we are then. Consciousness, love and Ananda, life and truth. Truth, that's the exact word. And naturally, they were supremely powerful beings. You understand? They were what are called in that tradition the first emanations, that is, the first formation. And each one became very conscious of its qualities, its powers, its capacities, its possibilities, and suddenly forgot each in its own way that it was only an emanation and incarnation of the Supreme. And so, this is what happened. When light or consciousness separated from the divine consciousness, that is, when it began to think it was the divine consciousness and that they were nothing other than itself, it suddenly became obscurity and inconscience. And when life thought that all life was itself, and when life thought that all life was in itself, and that there was nothing else but its life, and that it did not depend at all upon the Supreme, then its life became death. And when truth thought it contained all the truth, and that there was no other truth than itself, this truth became falsehood. And when love or Ananda was convinced that it was the supreme Ananda and that there was no other than itself and its felicity, it became suffering. Our Divine Mother says, and that is how the world, which has to have been so beautiful, became so ugly. Now, that consciousness, if you call it the Divine Mother, the Supreme Consciousness, when she saw this, she was very disturbed. You may be sure, she said to herself, this has really not succeeded. So she turned back to the Divine, to God, the Supreme, and asked Him to come to her aid. She said to Him, this is what has happened. Now, what is to be done? He said, begin again and try to manage in such a way that the beings do not become so independent. They must remain in contact with you and through you with me. And it was thus that she created the gods who were quite docile and not so proud, and who began the creation of the world. But as the others had come before them, at every step the gods meet the others. And it is in this way that the world changed into a battlefield, a place of war, strife, suffering, darkness, and all the rest. And for each new creation, the gods had to fight with the others who had gone ahead. They had preceded them. They had plunged headlong into matter, and they had created all this disorder, and gods had to put straight all this confusion. That is where the gods come from. They are the second emanations, says our Divine Mother. Then the child says, Sweet mother, the first four who changed, was it by chance or was it deliberately done? For this, our Divine Mother says, No. What is chance? It is said also that is the continuation of the story, or rather its beginning, that the Divine wanted his creation to be a free creation. He wanted all that went forth from him to be absolutely independent and free in order to be able to unite with him in freedom, not through compulsion. He did not want that they should be compelled to be faithful, compelled to be conscious, compelled to be obedient. They had to do it spontaneously through the knowledge and conviction that that was much better. So, this world was created as a world of total freedom, freedom of choice. And it is in this way that at every moment, everyone has a freedom of choice, but with all the consequences. If one chooses well, it is good. But if one chooses ill, well, what's to happen, happens. That is what happened. The story must be understood, says our Divine Mother. The story must be understood in such more occult and spiritual sense. But it is like all the stories of the universe, if you want to narrate them so that people may understand, they become stories for children. But if one knows how to see the truth behind the symbols, one understands everything. Our Divine Mother says, even with what I have told you, which seems like a story for a little story for children, even like that, if you understand what I have told you, the meaning of what I have told you, you can have the secret of the things. There are traditions which say that it is an accident in the sense that it could have been otherwise. But it happened like that. It is true. It came about like that. Only it was quite understandable that every one of these elements, having its origin in the Supreme, being quite close to the emanation at that moment, quite close to the origin, carried in itself the consciousness of the divinity and superiority necessarily, since this is not a creation made with something foreign to the divine. It is simply the divine who has emanated himself as though he was looking at himself. He objectivizes himself in order to become aware of what he is. Instead of being an inner static state of concentration in which all is unmanifested, he projects that outside himself in order to see as though he wanted to see all that is within him, that is, all the infinity of possibilities. So, all was possible. It happened like that. It could have happened otherwise. Besides, nothing tells you that alongside our universe as it is, there did not exist others which are so different that there cannot be any relation between one universe and the another. It can be very well be that our universe is not the only exteriorization of the divine. Ours is such as we know it, there may be others which are in much less a sorry state than this one. Besides, it is lamentable only in its appearance. If you go behind the appearance, you may become aware that it is not lamentable at all. It is one way of seeing it, says our Divine Mother. Next quote from our Divine Mother's words from volume 15. Each time that we have made a decisive step in our spiritual progress, the invisible enemies of the divine always try to have their revenge, and when they cannot injure the soul, they strike the body. But all their efforts are in vain, and we finally be defeated, for the divine grace is with us. Sweet Mother, what are these invisible enemies of the divine? For this, our Divine Mother says,